I'm Rob Port from SayAnythingBlog.com. I'm here with our two Republican House candidates and two public service commissioners, Kevin Cramer and Brian Kalk. Kevin, Brian, thank you for making time to do this. I'm sure the Say Anything readership appreciates it.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Rob. Always a pleasure.
Rob Brian here. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk to folks.
Absolutely. Basically, we have 17 questions. I just kind of went over this with you guys, but I wanted to make clear we're going to go to about I'm going to read each question. Brian, I think we'll start with you. I'll read you the first question. I'll give Kevin an opportunity to answer the same question. We'll go back and forth at the end. If either of you want to, expound a little bit further, that's fine, but try to keep it close, and we're going to try to keep this to about a half hour. Is that fine with you, gentlemen?
Sounds good here.
Sounds fine with me. Thanks, Rob.
All right, here we go. First question is from reader Tim for Brian. He writes, "We hear a lot about how Washington changes the candidates we send there. It's often jokingly referred to as Potomac fever. Though on the blog, I got to say, Tim used another term to describe what happens to politicians when they reach D.C. I'm not going to repeat that here. If elected, how would you avoid the quote-unquote Potomac fever or becoming part of the quote-unquote establishment when you reach Washington?"
Well, thank you for the call. There's the question. I think the first thing is we got to send a different kind of person to D.C. If we keep sending career politicians and bureaucrats, that's what you're going to get out there. How will I do it? I am 100% for term limits. I think you get out there, you work hard to solve the issues, and you get back home. I think the politicians spend too much time worried about getting reelected and not worried about doing their job out there. You go out there with the mindset that you're going to go out there, make the hard decisions for some period of time, and come back home. I think it's much easier to avoid the D.C. thing. I saw too many Marines be stationed in Quantico and stay out there too long and not get back to the operating forces. That's what the politicians got to do. Get out in D.C., work the issues, and then come back home.
Kevin, same question to you. How does a candidate, when they reach Washington and D.C., become or avoid the quote-unquote Potomac fever?
Well, I think one of the things that Tim is getting at is a very important issue with regard to the culture in Washington, D.C. So I appreciate Tim's question. I think first thing I would say on my own behalf, Rob, right up front, is that if I've done nothing else, I've certainly established that I'm not an establishment candidate, which probably means I'm not going to be an establishment congressman. In fact, just today I was endorsed by the Freedom Works PAC, which prides itself on endorsing non-establishment type of candidates, much like they did with Scott Walker and Representative Murdoch. I think it's important to have an accountability structure. My accountability structure begins with my home, with my wife, who would Chris and our family, who would still live in North Dakota. That forces the member back. That's what the founders had in mind with the People's House, the House of Representatives. The other thing is to surround yourself with an accountability structure. And one thing I've said from the very beginning is any lobbyist that wants to lobby me has to make an appointment with my scheduling secretary and come into my office and meet me there. Meals and casual time is going to be reserved for people from North Dakota. If the Farm Bureau comes or the North Dakota Farmers Union comes to town, I'm happy to meet with them. Friends from home, absolutely. Lobbyists, make an appointment to see me during office hours.
All right, Brian, any follow-up?
Well, I just would say that as far as establishment goes, we're the ultimate non-establishment candidate. We went through a hard-fought Republican convention to win this thing, and that's who we are. We're supported by the people of North Dakota.
All right. Next question, Kevin, from Shauna. She asks, what is the first legislation you would propose, if elected, that you think you could actually pass? And she says, we hear a lot about abolishing the EPA and some very ambitious goals, but pragmatically speaking, what do you think you could accomplish in your first term?
Well, first of all, I think Shauna raised a good point, but I think abolishing the EPA, which is a bit probably over dramatic, but certainly reducing the EPA would be a very high priority for me. And that doesn't require introducing legislation. What it requires is passing less legislation. The problem in Washington isn't that there's not enough legislation being passed. I mean, my goodness, we got 10 original commandments and we've been trying to improve on them ever since, and all we've done is messed it up. So the reality is rolling some things back, and that can be done, if not by policy legislation, certainly by budgetary legislation. And God knows we need some budgetary changes. And I think that the purse strings, the appropriations process, is a very good place to start, and it's a very important way to discipline the bureaucracy as it sits today. And so I don't plan on going there and introducing a bunch of legislation. I plan to go there and try to reduce legislation pass less legislation, but rather roll back some of the bad legislation, and more importantly, some of the overreach of the bureaucracy.
Brian, same question from Shauna. What's the first piece of legislation that you think you could pragmatically accomplish? Or I guess what could you pragmatically accomplish in your first term?
Well, I think the biggest thing we face right now is our debt and deficit problem. The current balanced budget amendment that's out there, I would get behind that 100% foursquare and do everything we can to get that piece of legislation passed. And as a subset of that, I would work very diligently to get the troops home out of Iraq and Afghanistan and really focus on a long-term foreign policy that we can afford in lives and as well as in money, and make sure that we get our troops in the right place and keep our country safe.
All right, I'm going to keep moving. Kevin, if you have any response, you can. At the end of these questions, when the other one responds, if either of you wants to jump in and add in a little bit more, that's fine. Just let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. Kevin, you're good?
I think we'll have opportunities.
All right. Next question is from reader Exalt for Brian. There's a lot of lingering angst about the debt deal Representative Rick Berg voted for in his first term in the House that created the so-called super committee. Knowing that hindsight is 20/20 and recognizing that the super committee ultimately accomplished very little and that Congress is already setting aside the spending caps in the debt deal, would you have voted for it? Would you vote for another deal like that if it came up in your first term?
Thank you, Rod. Absolutely not. I guess I was the only House candidate announced prior to the debt deal. I came out back last August and said I would absolutely not vote to raise the debt ceiling. That the whole super committee idea was not the way it was supposed to be done. I was vocal about not supporting it back then, and even now I would not ever vote to raise the debt ceiling. That's very cut and dried. The first thing you have to do if you're in a hole is stop digging. We keep raising this debt ceiling. We kick the can down the road and don't solve the problems. Absolutely would not vote to raise the debt ceiling.
Kevin, same question to you. Would you have voted for the debt deal that passed? Would you vote for it again if it came up in your first term?
I would not have voted for the debt ceiling increase that passed, and that if for no other reason, Rob, the fact that Congress abdicated its authority. North Dakota gets one member, just one out of 435. For that member to abdicate their authority to a, quote, super committee is it's irresponsible. I would not do it. We've had that opportunity in our own commission here with regard to some of these regional organizations that want to create sort of regional governments and regional electric grids and set regional markets. And I've resisted it vehemently many times against some pretty strong opposition from time to time. So advocating authority is a non-starter for me. With regard to raising the debt ceiling in general, however, if they don't have an equal number of cuts to go with the raising of the debt ceiling, we got to go the right direction here, not continue to go the wrong direction. Our debt has increased $5 trillion in the last 3 years alone. That's a 50% increase. We're at $15.72 trillion and counting right now, and our debt now exceeds the productivity of our nation. We are close to being Greece or Spain, and we have got to put a stop to it.
All right, Kevin, unless Brian's got any reaction, we'll move on to the next question. From reader Spartacus, he writes, what will you do to rein in the power of federal agencies like the EPA and the TSA? What will you do to address executive overreach in the form of executive branch appointed czars?
Well, first of all, there should be no czars. There's no czars in the Constitution. There are no czars in the legislation. It should be disciplined and it should be defunded. If any president, and I don't care, Spartacus, if it's a Republican president or a Democrat president, suggests that somehow they should be able to appoint, quote, czars or agency directors of made-up agencies, I'd say you don't, not only do you not fund it, but you cut funding for whatever agency or discipline it's under to ensure that there are places and people cut. And then you have to take the necessary disciplinary actions beyond that if you have the muscle to do it. That is to say, large enough majorities and the will of the Congress to do it. But I'm very anti-czar. I'm very anti-bureaucracy. I mean, I've stood up to this bureaucracy many times. As I said earlier, EPA, which in many respects for North Dakota's energy development is enemy number one, and there are several others, by the way. If you can't do it any other way, you've got to do it through the purse strings and the appropriations authority of Congress. The EPA, by the way, is one agency I am willing to spend a lot of capital to defeat. That, to me, they are doing so much harm to our two main industries of agriculture and energy that they have got to be stopped at nearly all costs.
Brian, same question to you. What will you do to rein in the power of federal agencies like the EPA and the TSA, and what will you do to address executive branch overreach in the form of quote-unquote czars?
Well, the first thing about the executive branch overreach and the czar is that just absolutely cannot happen. There's no such thing that those type of things should be happening. They've got to stop. The people in the Congress and the Senate have got to stand up to the president and stop those kind of things because it doesn't make sense. The next piece of it, when you look at some of these federal agencies, as my opponent talked about the EPA, they are enemy number one for North Dakota. The overregulation coming out of that office, it directly threatens our energy sector, directly threatens our ag sector. But I would even take it a step farther. There's the organizations like the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. It just need to go away, period. That agency should be closed. Start out with defunding it and get rid of it. This is an agency that gave automatic weapons to Mexican drug lords, who were then used to kill U.S. Border Patrol agents. And we've got the Attorney General of the United States that should be on trial right now. And right now, Congress is not doing anything about it. I mean, we've got immigration challenges that we need to solve, and we've got a president that's making the problem worse. These type of agencies need to be defunded and gotten rid of as soon as possible, and push the authorities back to the states where appropriate.
All right, moving on. Next question from readers Dakota Mel and Ralph. They ask, how do you feel about subsidies for so-called green energies like solar power, wind power, and ethanol? Should they end or continue? And specifically, do you support or oppose the extension of the production tax credit for wind farm development? Brian.
Sure. I will tell you that I support a fully balanced energy program. Whether you have coal, whether you have wind, whether you have natural gas, whether you have solar, but they all have to be cost benefited out. And so right now, given the fact that we're $16 trillion in debt, these subsidies need to stop. We need to figure out a way to develop all of our energy, but do it in a way that encourages the private sector to make the right investments and to put the right type of energy source where need be. And that's a problem with the EPA right now, is they're trying to shut down our fossil fuel industry. We do need to balance energy program policies, but it's got to be in such a way that makes sense. The subsidies for the green energies, they need to stop, and they need to be able to cost out. And when they cost out, they'll become part of the power mix.
Kevin, same question for you. How do you feel about subsidies for green energies like solar power, wind power, and ethanol? And specifically, do you support the extension of the production tax credit for wind farm development?
Well, let's start with the last question, the production tax credit. And this is an area where I'm going to be at odds with our current delegation. I do not support an extension of the production tax credit. I was asked fairly recently by some of the largest wind companies in this country who wanted my opinion on this. They wanted to know what it would take for me to support it. And I said, what it would take for me to support that would be for a balanced budget. And we don't have one. We cannot mortgage our children's future any longer. But there are lots of issues related to that. With regard to a balanced energy approach, I think the energy approach of this country should not be determined by a federal policy. It ought to be determined by consumers. And consumers ought to be able to choose the fuel of their choice. They ought to choose the vehicle that they want to choose. The utilities ought to choose the lowest cost. The standard that we use at the Public Service Commission, when we set rates, when we determine prudence, when we do economic oversight of our utilities, the main standard we use is lowest cost. That ought to be the standard. That ought to be the policy of the United States government with regard to energy. Investment will take place when there's certainty, and when there's uncertainty, investment has to assume the worst case scenario. The problem with the Obama administration, what the Democrats want to do with energy policy, is the worst case scenario is what they aspire to. The certainty they aspire to is the worst case scenario. We need to return to free markets, free people making the choices, and then we'll let price and cost determine what our energy future looks like.
Kevin, that question for you, it's from the Whistler. He asks, we hear a lot about balancing the budget outside of the obvious, like a balanced budget amendment. What specifically would you do to balance the budget?
Sure. Here's where I would start. I would do what we did in the Schaefer administration when I was on his cabinet. I submitted 4 biennial budgets. Every budget was lower than the previous budget. First thing we need to do is roll back federal spending to 2008 levels, pre-TARP, pre-stimulus, pre-Obamacare, and then let that be the benchmark, and then require every agency to submit budgets that are lower than the previous one. I would suggest a 4 to 5% decreased budget every year until the budget balances. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to have to live with a 4 or 5% decrease perhaps every year, but they ought to be about the rigorous discipline of finding cuts, of eliminating programs that no longer are relevant, prioritizing so that they can eliminate these programs and put a hiring freeze on And Rob, not only do you find significant budget cuts, now we haven't gotten into entitlements, I suspect we will, but not only do you find some real money and some real cuts, but beyond that, what you do is you send signals into the marketplace to the investment community and the job creators. You're serious about this, and I think we can get our economy stimulated again with that kind of an approach, and we'll find that we can balance this budget quicker than some people give credit for.
Brian, same question for you. Outside of balancing a balanced budget amendment, how do we balance the budget? What specifically would you do to balance the budget?
Sure, thanks, Rob. It kind of goes back to my previous point of the first thing we have to do is quit raising the debt ceiling. I mean, when they continue to do this, raising the debt ceiling, we don't actually solve any of the problems. So first thing, don't raise the debt ceiling again. The next thing I would say is look back at, when you look at we've been overseas now fighting wars since 2003. Now there has been a huge budgetary cost to that. So we need to figure out a way that we can keep our country safe, get these troops back home so we're not paying for these deployments over and over again. And as we look at restructuring bases around the world, we need to take a real serious look at closing bases around the world that we don't need. We've got bases in Germany right now that as soon as we wrap things down in Iraq and Afghanistan, that they really need to be looked at shutting those down. If there's not a definite strategic importance for these bases overseas, we need to close them. You take that back home a little bit, we absolutely have got to continue to grow our economy. If we put certainty in there, people know what the rules are going to be, we get our economy going again, there's more revenue out there, and that helps us go a long ways towards it. The next thing we've got to do is look at the agencies. We talked about defunding them. We should not be continuing to raise budgets for EPA, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. You make the agencies inside the federal government reduce their spending, and some of those agencies need to be eliminated, put those responsibilities back to the state. Basically, there needs to be nothing that's off the table until we get our budget balanced.
Brian, since you brought up military spending, we actually had a question specifically about that from a reader. Marty asks, Republicans often hold defense spending as sacred and oppose cuts, but the nation is in terrible fiscal shape, and it seems all parts of government could see some savings. Are there cuts that can be made in defense spending, and what are those cuts? And I know you just addressed some of it, but could you expound on that a little bit?
Well, I think so, sure. I talked about the bases, but, as a 20-year retired Marine, I think that one of the things that we need to look at is continue to do more joint training. There was a time when I first enlisted in the Marine Corps, we had 4 different jump schools, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. Now they've consolidated training facilities. When we appropriate new gear, we buy new weapon systems, buy things that benefit all the services. So you still have your service integrity, but there needs to be a lot smarter way of the way we acquisition gear, the way we train our Marines and our sailors and airmen. And I think what that comes down to is if you've got a long-term foreign policy and defense policy that you know who the enemy is going to be, you then build a force structure that's appropriate to that size, and you fund that force structure. Right now, I think we've got people in the Armed Services Committee and others that they don't quite understand what the future of the world is going to look like, so we don't know what military size we're going to need. That's where if we can win this thing and be part of the Armed Services Committee, we bring the knowledge and background to then develop that type of service that we can afford and it can meet the growing threats.
Kevin, same question for you. Are there cuts that can be made in defense spending, and what are those cuts?
Well, first of all, I'm sure there are, because there are no doubt cuts you can make in any federal bureaucracy. One of the areas that I would have a special interest in looking into if I was in Congress would be at the defense contractors. Why is it that contractors or third parties, whether they're providing a service or a good or a product or manufacturing, that if it's the military, it seems to cost so much more than if it's a private citizen contracting for it. We need to look long and hard at our procurement laws and rules and who's in charge of them, and make sure that the taxpayer, whether you're buying a fighter jet, a missile, paying an employee, or buying a tractor, it ought to be the best deal you can get for the taxpayer or for the person, the consumer that's buying it. In the case of the military, the taxpayer. I suspect there are lots of savings that can be found in that regard. The other area, of course, really is the consolidation of things, the more efficiency. We need to have a smart military, and I think there have been some strides made in those areas, but then no doubt there could be many, many more.
Kevin, asking you the next question from reader C. Tom Run. Would you support keeping Speaker John Boehner in his current position as the Speaker?
Yeah, I guess I don't. I've only met John Boehner one time, and we talked about the Keystone XL pipeline, and he seemed like an affable guy. I will say this: it's easy to be very critical of Speaker Boehner because because he's got such a tough job to do. And his balancing between the sort of the establishment crowd and those 90 or so younger conservative members is no doubt a very difficult task. I can tell you that both sides have great angst about him because he hasn't given either one everything that they want to do. I can tell you I would not pledge my vote to him before the election. If I was fortunate enough to be elected and I went to Congress, I would certainly want to interview him and look at whether there are any other options on the table. But I'm not prepared to say that I would not support John Boehner for Speaker or at this point and to sort of jump on that bandwagon.
Brian, same question for you. Would you support keeping Speaker John Boehner as Speaker of the House?
Well, it was interesting. This was one of the questions we had in one of our early on debates before the Republican convention. And the very same question came. And I said, one of the responsibilities, if not the biggest responsibility of the House of Representatives, is to make sure we have a budget, make sure we have a balanced budget. And him, working that deal to raise the debt ceiling and being part of that, I would not support him. I just would not do it.
I'm sorry, Kevin, did you want to follow up?
Well, here's one thing I would say that Brian and I no doubt would agree on, and I hope all of your listeners and readers pay close attention to. Neither one of us would vote for Nancy Pelosi.
Fair enough. Brian, next question's for you from reader Jimmy Pop. If elected, what laws would be at the top of your list for repeal?
Well, the first thing we absolutely have to do is get rid of Obamacare. If the Supreme Court is not to throw it out first, absolutely that has got to go away. I just think that I was reading today about some of the provisions in there that if this thing is not repealed, puts in where basically there's health care coverage for illegal immigrants. Number one, we've got to repeal Obamacare. That is the biggest job-killing law out there right now. It's got to go.
He said laws plural. Any more off the top of your head, Brian?
Well, the EPA goes back to many of the type of environmental rulings that are coming out of there where they're trying to limit quote greenhouse gases. I think those have to go away. Anything that we can do to create certainty in our investment. But right now, that's what comes to mind off the top of my head is the Obamacare and the overreach of the EPA.
Kevin, same question for you. If elected, what laws would be at the top of your list to eliminate?
Well, Obamacare would be the first one for sure, Rob. And you talk about the debt problem and the deficit problem. Obamacare, just this year alone has a $5 billion budget, and of course, as many people anticipated, the Office of Management and Budget has already determined that the deficit will be double what they said it would be when they passed Obamacare. So it's got to be repealed. And then I think we also have to, as Republicans, we have to have an alternative. And we were in charge quite a while when this crisis was happening, if you will, and nothing was done. We need to replace it with good, solid reforms that hopefully we'll have the opportunity to talk about those reforms in another question down the road. Then I would just go back to many of those same regulatory agencies like the EPA, like the Army Corps of Engineers, like the Department of Energy, like the Interior Department, where we could either eliminate them altogether or certainly cut them way, way back, do some consolidation, push more things back to the states, more authority back to the states. It's amazing if the states had more authority, which they're supposed to have as per the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, they could do it better for a lot less money. And that ought to be the goal. And by the way, it's just the right thing.
Kevin, next question for you. It's from Mordecai. He asks, it's clear that you both disagree strongly with the Obama administration and think our current president's made a lot of mistakes. But what policy mistakes or what areas did you disagree with our last Republican president, George W. Bush?
Well, it's funny. It's a great next question, because one of the things that occurred to me in the previous question was, in terms of repeal, was No Child Left Behind. To me, that was one of the biggest blunders of the last administration. Now, I could make a pretty strong case for their choice to go into Iraq, and we could debate that. But I think one of the things that stands out most clear to me was No Child Left Behind, and the way that just added to the already bloated education bureaucracy in our country. I mean, our Department of Education, for crying out loud, has a $121 billion annual budget. And does anybody really think they're doing a good job with that? So that's another one of those departments we can cut way back and give more authority back to states where it belongs.
Brian, same question for you. What mistakes or in what areas did you disagree with our last Republican president, George W. Bush?
Sure. I'll just say right up front that I don't disagree with President Bush's decision to commit troops into Afghanistan, and I don't disagree with his decision to commit troops into Iraq. But I do disagree with not defining a beginning state and an end state of the war and not putting those wars on the budget cycle. That's one of the biggest things, the mistakes I think he made, because the country needs to pay for its conflicts when they go to it. And the second thing is that him signing off on that stimulus package, I think, set the tone for our current president to do that. So I think those two things were big missteps on behalf of President Bush.
All right, moving on to the next question. Let's see here. I'm sorry, I just lost my place. Brian, I think you're up for the next question. According to the New York Times, 2/3 of bachelor degree students finance their education these days. National student loan debt is over $1 trillion and adds up more to national credit card debt. In 2011, the average student had $23,000 in student loan debt. Since 1982, the cost of tuition and fees has grown at double the rate of medical expenses, triple the rate of median household incomes, and more than quadruple the rate of overall price inflation. Many, including myself, compare the student loan problem to the housing bubble we faced under President Bush and Obama. What has caused this student loan problem or this higher education problem, and how can we fix it?
Boy, a lot there, Rob. I would just step back a little bit to two things. One is that after I retired from the Marine Corps, I taught at North Dakota State for a while, and I also have a daughter in college right now. And I think that, there's a lot of responsibility that can go around in that. And I think one of the very, very hallmark things is that parents and students need to make sure that they're making the right decisions when they send their kids to college. I grew up in Boston, and we've got a very good 2-year college there. And there's got School of Science down in Wapton, and you've got North Dakota State and UND and University of Marion, all these great 4-year schools. But what we need to pick the right place for our kids to go to school. If we can find a good school that's local, that meets the needs, then we should send our kids to that school. And then I think that helps out that when the kids graduate, they've got a skill that they can use, whether it's a 2-year degree or 4-year degree or an advanced degree. And the second thing is, it has become so easy for students to get student loans, and the parents and the students don't even think about someday they're going to have to pay them back. So it's a mindset that's developing where it's quote free money, so they just apply for it. And there's a culture that is developed in higher ed where, well, I'm just going to apply for these loans, I'm going to get them. So what it takes, I think, is that you've got to have the right people to understand the process of what is a student's goal when they go to college, to get a degree and get out in the workforce. You've got to have good advisors in the college that say, listen, if you don't need that student loan, then don't take it. Maybe you should do a part-time job. I just think that there's so many facets to it. But it does come back to personal responsibility of making sure that you make the right decisions where to send your children to school and making sure that you don't sign those loans because the students themselves are taking them. They're not being forced to take them.
Kevin, same question for you. Tim says that we have a student loan bubble problem. What caused this problem and how do we fix it?
Well, Brian's right in that it was easy money that caused it, but it's not the fault of the students or the parents for taking the easy money. It's the natural response of the marketplace to easy money. That's why healthcare inflation is so much greater than the consumer price index, and it's why higher education inflation is so much higher than the index. I serve on the board of trustees. In fact, I'm an executive member of the board of trustees at the University of Mary, a private university here in Bismarck. I know a lot about what it costs to educate a person, a young person, or a non-traditional student. And the reality is that as long as people have access to easy money, price follows money. It's basic fundamental economics 101, and if you want to trim down, you eat less. If we want to trim down the higher education bureaucracy, whether it's in North Dakota or in the country, and this is tough medicine for a lot of people to hear, and I'm not going to be popular at the faculty lounge, but the reality is that we have to apply this personal responsibility to the economy, to the economics of higher education. It makes no sense that the inflation of the country should be, 1, 2, 3%, but the inflation in higher education would be many times more than that. It's called price theory.
Kevin, this next question's for you, and I know you've addressed it a couple of times, so we're finally going to talk about entitlements. Keith asks, the biggest problem with the nation's budget is entitlements. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid alone account for 41% of the budget. we cannot balance the budget without reforming costs of these programs. How do we do that?
Well, first of all, great question, Keith. And first of all, we have to at least admit it's a problem. And perhaps the greatest disappointment in the person that either Brian or I are going to will be facing in the fall is that she's just like the Democrats of the 1980s and 90s, pretending that there's not a problem in Medicare and that there's not a problem with Social Security. The reality is, if we do nothing as they propose, stick our heads in the sand, it goes bankrupt. It goes, south, and there will be no benefits for anybody. So let's acknowledge the problem. I support some type of means testing for Social Security. I think we ought to raise the age for Social Security recipients, but we ought to draw a line, a reasonable line, where people above a certain age will not be subject to the changes. We've made a promise to them, a covenant, a contract with our seniors. They've paid in. They have an expectation that we ought to honor. That's the first thing. And before Brian and I get called, mean ogres for pushing old people over cliffs, we're going to acknowledge that reality, and we'll have to acknowledge it many times between now and the fall. But once we do that, I think one of the things that especially Medicare, that I think we have got to do, it's just like all of healthcare, provide consumer choice. When you provide choice, you can bring down price. When you bring down price, you bring down costs. It's a fundamental economic principle. And so we draw the line, whether it's the age of 55 as Paul Ryan wants, or 50 or 45 or whatever that line is. Obviously the lower the line, the further out balancing the budget is. And then we have opportunities for choice. Let's remember that Barack Obama's idea with healthcare and with Medicare was we're going to save $500 billion. He cuts $500 billion out of Medicare, and then to pay for it, he wants to appoint a rationing board. And I'd prefer to appoint the principles of free markets to drive down cost.
Brian, same question for you. How do we can't balance the budget without addressing entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, 41% of the budget. How do we reform costs in these programs?
Well, and a great point. I mean, I would also throw on there defense as another 20% of the budget. So those three make up 60-some% of the budget. And I will tell you that this is one of those issues that I think that whichever one of us comes out of the primary, that our opponent in the fall is going to try to say just what Kevin said, is that Republicans don't care about old people and all this, but we certainly do. And the way we do it is that we're the ones that are willing to make the tough decisions to make sure we do honor our commitment to seniors. And it goes back to one of the biggest things we could do right now is get our economy back going again, so more people are working, more people are paying into Social Security to continue to grow that fund, if you will. And the next thing we absolutely have to do is we have to look at raising the age which you draw Social Security. We've got to pick that line in the sand and say, if I'm 46 years old, so if you told me that I had to work an extra 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years to get to that age, I would say okay. But there's somewhere in there that I think that that's not appropriate. So let's pick that age and say, okay, if you're above 50 years old, we're not going to touch it. But if you're younger than that, I think that then we look at adjusting the program. So I think that's the first step we have to do. You also look at the Medicare and Medicaid. We absolutely have to have choice. If individuals can have choice where they're going to go to, I think the choice will then affect cost, and which will eventually drive down the cost. But these are not easy decisions, but I think that we absolutely have to make them and make those hard cuts, and then be able to stand up in front of our constituents and say, this is why we're doing it, because ultimately we've got to get this budget balanced, because without a balanced budget, it's hard to imagine much of anything else going forward.
Brian, next question is for you. It's from Dell. He asks, are you more conservative than your opponent, and why do you feel that way?
That's one of those questions about, who's better looking at this. Interesting. What I would say is this, is that life begins at conception. Traditional marriage is the only kind of marriage. I believe in low taxes, low regulation, and we are absolutely a very conservative individual.
Kevin, same question for you. Are you more conservative than Brian, and why do you feel that way?
Here's what I would say. I don't think there's any question about my conservative credentials. I have been a public figure in North Dakota for a very long time. I have a long body of work, everything from New York Times op-eds to Wall Street Journals to Fargo Forum, Bismarck Tribune, Say Anything blog, and on it goes. And again, that's why today I received the endorsement from Freedom Works PAC, which is perhaps the most rigorous free market conservative political action committee test that you can pass in this country. And so I can't speak to Brian's conservatism as much, but I can certainly speak to mine. And and that is that I am a steadfast conservative that believes in free markets. I believe in free people, and I believe in our Constitution, that the founders had it right, that there are truths that are self-evident, and that the rights are guaranteed in the Constitution. So I would rather speak to my own conservatism than to Brian's, but there's no question about where I stand on issues.
The next question is from Carmen. She asks, we're often told that there is too much gridlock in Washington, D.C. There's too little civility and too much polarization and not enough compromise. Do you agree? If so, how do we stop it? And at what point, if ever, does compromise become more important than principle?
I think start with me. I think Carmen raises an important point. It's an interesting observation that she's right. A lot of people have made. Some people say, "Well, gridlock's the best thing that can happen to the country because then they're not doing anything to us." The problem with gridlock today is that we're operating without a budget and have for 3 years. Our country's operating on that inflated budget with continuing resolutions that is, post-TARP, post-bailout, post-stimulus, post-Obamacare, and it's bankrupting the country. So gridlock is hurting the country right now. Here's what I'd say. You need to know where you stand. You need to know what your foundation is and what your bedrock principles are, and you need to stand by them by and large. But one of the things both Brian and I do every day in our jobs up here at the Public Service Commission here in Bismarck is that what we do is you have to know, well, you know where you stand. You also have to know what fights to fight, when to collect political capital and when to spend political capital, because you also have to be effective when you get there. Standing on principle and not moving the ball forward in a conservative direction is not a good thing. There are certain things I will not compromise on. I will always vote for life. Every single time I will support life, as an example. And so we have some bedrock principles for sure that you got to stand on.
Brian, same question for you. We hear all the time about gridlock, polarization, civility in Washington, D.C. Do you agree that those things are a problem? How do we stop it? And at what point does compromise become more important than principle?
Sure. Is it a problem? I think that it is a problem, but at the end of the day, what we have to do is we've got to solve the problems. And what we're missing, I think, right now in D.C. is we're missing strong leaders that can put forward very good ideas, that they can develop coalitions behind them. Long-term foreign policy is going to take both sides of the aisle to develop. These long-term budgetary solutions are going to take both sides of the aisle to develop. What we're missing right now is, I will tell you though, I do like the fact that Paul Ryan has put forward a budget, Rand Paul has put forward a budget. That's leadership. They put forward budgets that they're now going out there to defend, and that's the process. The House does their thing, the Senate does their thing. So I think that they've taken some good steps. But in areas of compromise, there's some areas that you never compromise on. Life begins at conception. You do not compromise on that. Traditional marriage is the only kind of marriage. So you've got to have those core principles that are yours. You never compromise on no matter what, because that's who you are and what you believe. But in other areas, sure, you have to look at, okay, is it best that we work out this and move the needle one way or the other? So you've just got to know, based on your experience and your background, when's the right time to work with someone and when's the right time to hold fast to your principles. And that's where I think that knowing who you are before you get to Washington, D.C. is very important. We know what our core principles are. We know what the issues that we really, really want to move the ball forward when we get out there, and we will fight for those all the way through our time there.
Brian, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Brian and I probably, if I could, Rob, I think Brian and I probably are a pretty good example. Brian and I aren't the same exact person. We're very close to the same in many respects, but we work together every day at the Public Service Commission on issues that we sometimes disagree on, but we work through them and find the right solution that moves the ball forward. I think when you start talking about compromise, and when good compromises with evil, evil always wins. The ball moves that direction. But there are a lot of issues where compromise probably gets us closer to a conservative solution than to a liberal solution, and you just have to have that ability to sort of measure those things. I think that's part of the skill, if you will, of legislating. But I think Carmen's, and I don't know what Carmen's point is or necessarily where her perspective is, but one of the things I think that is lacking, that hasn't always been this way, Rob, and that is sort of just the dignity of how we treat each other. I think most people, and Brian chime in, but I think most people would be surprised at how well Brian and I get along every day. I mean, we sit in offices right next to each other up in the Capitol. We like each other a lot, and the most common question I get is, hey, how is it up there? It's like they expect there to be some sort of fight going on all the time. And I do think that there's some decorum and some, frankly, just people not being friends enough. And you know what? Relationships still matter. Whether you're getting your oil change in your car or whether you're passing important legislation, relationships still matter, and there seems to be some loss of that.
Brian, any follow-up?
Well, just that I think that Kevin pointed it out very clearly, is that there needs to be respect and there needs to be leadership. Is that Kevin and I do sit beside each other every day, and we understand where we agree on things, when we disagree. But if you disagree, there's a way that you can disagree with the policy, but not so much the person. And it's about respect. It's about how you got there and about what you want to do. And I think that that's what we're missing, is we're missing the leadership out in D.C. We're missing the understanding of we're out in D.C. to serve the people, not our own needs, and actually solve the problems. So at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do, is solve these problems to keep our country on the right track and to keep us even very strong.
Brian, next, I think it's your turn to ask or answer the next question from conservative soccer mom. She asks, you both serve on the Public Service Commission together, and this is actually kind of ironic that this is coming up after your answer to the last question. During that time, have there been times when you've disagreed on an issue, and what were those times, and on what did you disagree?
Well, there's been, I guess, I can think of, there's been a couple 2-1 votes, and Kevin and I were on one side of a 2-1 vote dealing with the violation, I think, up in the coal fields, and I think there was another one dealing with the rape case. But I think for the most part, when we sit down at the table and we look at all the facts and issues, we all bring out our viewpoints, and then we move forward. So I think that's a couple times. I think there's perhaps some others, but those come to mind. But the process of the PSC is not to say no. The process is, let's figure out a way to build that power line, to build that pipeline, to do the things that we have to do. And so we make our arguments and we adjust the projects accordingly, and then we go forward. We recently just held strong as a commission on some of the recent tariffs. So I think that's the point of where you take what we do in North Dakota to D.C. is we sit down, we say our concerns, we draft what we think is a good policy, and then we vote on it and move forward. That's where I think if you've got the right people sitting at the table, you can make better decisions.
Kevin, same question for you. During obviously you and Brian both on the Public Service Commission during that time. What have you disagreed on, I guess, is the question.
Well, I'm just trying to think of some of these topics. In fact, there's good that Brian reminded me of a couple, because I was having a hard time coming up with some. I'm trying to think of the coal mine violation one. I think that was one where I lost on a. Did I lose on a 2-1? Or no, you and I were on the same side. That's right. That was a violation where we felt that there was not a violation. Commissioner Clark felt that there was, I think in our case we felt like the spirit of the law had been met, if not the technicality of the law. The other was the MDU rate case, where I dissented from the majority and did not want to support the cost of a wind farm built, as I thought, the result of a mandate in Montana by a Montana mandate. I didn't feel it was appropriate for North Dakota ratepayers to have to pay for that. And so we disagreed, but we moved forward and and continued to do the right thing every day for the citizens of North Dakota and the people that we represent. And I think Brian's characterized it very well.
Kevin, next. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
I just add a follow-up to that. Is in that case dealing with the MDU, I did not agree with the whole amount, but I did agree with Chairman Clark that there was a part that was used and useful. But that's a good example of we had the debate, we voted, and moved on.
All right. We have 2 questions left. Kevin, I think it's your turn to go first. You've both been named in a lawsuit by groups claiming you broke ethics regulations by taking contributions from power industry interests that you regulate as public service commissioners. I want to read to you what your Democrat opponent Pam Gullison has said about it. She says, quote, "It is essential that those given the responsibility of regulating North Dakota businesses are able to make independent decisions unbiased by campaign contributions. During my time in North Dakota State Legislature, I worked on several bills to strengthen North Dakota's campaign ethics laws. Our state deserves independent regulators who will work for the people." How do you respond to those accusations of unethical conduct?
Well, let me respond to Pam Gullison first. She's exactly right, and that's exactly what the result is. With regard to the allegations, of course, they're frivolous. They're so frivolous that the federal agency that is responsible for them didn't even reply to them, which is why they're also named in the lawsuit. It's a hard thing to get into a lot of depth on, although I certainly could, but it would take a long time with regard to case law that supports our position. But the reality is that both Brian and I are independent regulators, that campaign contributions don't determine how we vote on anything. And by the way, it wasn't a company or interest, it was individuals who contributed. That is legal. Not only is it legal, but it's the responsibility of free people in a free society. That democracy can only work if free people exercise their right to express themselves. These were not huge contributions, and they were legal contributions. And there's no reason that in any political campaign for any candidate that people on one side or another shouldn't contribute to the candidate that they feel would best represent their views on things. That is what free people do, and we ought not to stifle it. We shouldn't just say a certain class of contributor can't participate in the process, but this class can. In fact, it's ironic that one of the entities that are suing us, their attorney, made a large contribution to my opponent in the last campaign while he's filing a lawsuit against me for a contribution I received from somebody else that doesn't agree with his position. So it's politics, and we understand that. That's just part of the deal.
Brian, same question for you. Give you an opportunity to respond.
Sure. Yeah. When I used to teach political science at North Dakota State, one of the things I told the students about, public policy and politics is that if you don't have a good message, you try to change the message. Well, the Democratic Party has no message. So they're trying to come up with anything they can to change the message, to not talk about the bad policies because of the Democratic Party out in D.C. And so what we've got here is a 100% politically timed, politically motivated nonsense. When they first filed the notice of intent to sue, if you will, it was a week before the Republican convention, trying to knock me out of the convention. Well, we won the convention, and now I predict what will happen is the week prior to the primary, they'll file the official lawsuit prior to the primary, as Kevin and I will be squaring off on that. What we've had here is we've got a private citizen that has donated money prior to my election cycle in 2008, as well as my opponents in 2010, completely reported, done everything right, but they're struggling for a message. So what we have is this is the kind of things we're dealing with, where it's interesting that they've picked one industry to go after, and clearly the Democratic Party is doing everything they can to stop our fossil fuel industry. And what it does is it creates more uncertainty. So instead of solving the problems, they're making it more and more difficult to solve them.
Last question, and this one is actually from me, and Brian, this will be to you to go first. Make your case for why you're a better candidate for North Dakota than Pam Gullison.
Oh, from Pam Gullison, that's not even difficult, I tell you. I'll tell you what we absolutely have to do is we got to change the kind of person we're sending to Washington, D.C. Our potential opponent in the fall worked for a D.C. insider, her senator, a Democrat senator for many, many years. She's the ultimate insider. She's the ultimate person that doesn't know how to solve problems. What we'll bring to the table is new ideas, understanding of what really goes on in the world. We understand how North Dakota fits in the United States. We understand how the United States fits into the world. We have the ability to make the hard, difficult decisions because we work for the people of North Dakota. And I'll tell you that the policies that come out of the Republican side of the aisle are the right policies. Our potential opponent in the fall, she only knows one way to approach government. You grow government, you overregulate, and you just continue to grow the nanny state. That's not what we need right now. We need hard decisions to not raise the debt ceiling. We need hard decisions to make sure we balance the budget. We need to make sure we understand that we need to push more and more responsibility to the states, and it'll take a different kind of politician out in D.C. if you want different results.
Kevin, same question for you. Why are you a better candidate than Pam Gullison?
Well, let's start with our vote for Speaker of the House. I promise I would not vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House. I doubt you get that promise out of Pam Gullison. And with that comes the whole array of other things that are the problem and that are very good differentiating factors for me. The depth and breadth of my experience in this state as a public official, as an educator, as somebody who has now overseen the most dynamic energy economy in the country, if not in the world. The relationships that I've formed with with the people that are the job creators and the wealth creators in this state and in this country. My long body of work as a conservative commentator, as somebody, as a free market thinker, as somebody who has implemented free market policies as a regulator, as well as an appointed official, as well as an educator in higher education. My body of work is long, it's deep, it's intellectual, and it's rigorous. And I would want to bring that same experience, especially this experience I've had these last several years on the Public Service Commission, watching and overseeing and frankly helping this incredible economic growth take place in North Dakota. The way I help the most often is by not over-regulating, letting the private sector do what the private sector does best. That's a stark difference between me and Pam Willis.
All right. Well, we're almost at double the time that I originally said that this was going to take, so I apologize for that. But I did want to give you a little bit of time at the end. Kevin, you first, then Brian. If there's anything that we didn't address during this time or to make a final statement, whatever you want.
Well, I think that the answer to your question was sufficient for that, Rob. I just appreciate this opportunity. I appreciate Brian's making himself available and his willingness to do this. One thing about both Brian and I, we're a couple of transparent public officials, and we're blessed to serve the people of North Dakota in the capacity we do right now. It's noble that we want to move on and do something more and something perhaps bigger in a much more difficult job with probably fewer rewards, quite honestly. So I appreciate this opportunity to have this discussion and this debate. And above all else, Rob, I just would ask from my heart for the support and the vote of every person that will listen to this debate or read about it over the coming days and that June 12th primary, as I want to take this message of a freer people, a free America, and a constitutional America to Washington, D.C., and see if we can't get this country back on track before we get on the irrevocable slippery slope that we're headed on.
Brian, same opportunity for you.
Well, just thank you, Rob, for giving Kevin and I the chance to talk about our campaigns and what we're up to. Everything for our campaign is going just exactly as we'd hoped. We just went through the Republican convention. We came out ahead on that, and we're really gearing up for the June 12th primary. And I would also like to ask all your listeners for their vote, June 12th. If you have any other questions, please email us, call us, look at our website, because it's so very important that people are involved in this political process. They get out there and they make an informed vote. So the best thing that Rob, you and your show does is inform people on the issues and let people get out there and cast their ballot. So I promise you this, if they vote for us, we'll bring a different kind of candidate to D.C., which will give you different outcomes, and we'll work hard every day for the people of North Dakota.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time.